Hello, we're having a bit of technical problems, so I hope you can work it out. The purpose of this podcast is try and get you, the single mom with a child that is working all day long and you can't make the budget, to call in and start telling us how much money you make, how much you pay for rent, and how much uh, does the child need to, how much groceries are. And if you have any recreation time at all, we're going to start putting numbers on this and do something about it. And the same with the guy. If you're a young man and you're trying to actually be a husband and support the wife and child, I guarantee you, you don't make nearly as much money. And so the question is, how many hours do you have to work in order to come up with a family budget? And that's called home economics. And home economics was something that was thrown out here in the United States in the early to mid 70s. And so we're hoping that you'll hear this and gather our gang in the playground, and so we can go to work. These podcasts have been on a couple of times now, and so I can't imagine anybody so much as seeing it at the moment, but I hope so. I see that the YouTube guy people are saying something wrong with the idea of typing things in. I hope you try anyway. It's so terribly important. We have a couple of YouTube channels with about 3 dozen 5 to 10 minute anecdotes that I'm sure will help you. And so we're going to ramble in the good sense of the word. We're going to repeat the things we need to say, and hopes to get the idea across and to gather our gang. Remember, the Communist Party in the 1950s came out and said they would overthrow the United States by about the year 1973. And that was a watershed year for the United States and those times. That was a year the highest standard of living as far as the average Joe is concerned. And from there, things took a worse. We started plunging into a peasant and property class society. What happened? They threw out God and country. To sound philosophical, they threw out, I believe it's the fourth and fifth way of Aquinas. They have fancy names. They're more affectionately known as the truth of the truth and the decent of the decent. Yeah. The gal who changes the dirty diapers gets the sex. The priest who takes a vow of poverty maximizes profits. And holding Christ's divinity as faith, putting that star in the sky, is what holds it all together. And in psychology, they threw out a sense of original sin. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual did. The Shop Manual, both the Catholic and the atheist define the Shop Manual version of mental illness as the normal taken into the abnormal, from a cold to the flu to pneumonia. The Catholics say go backwards, go back to the normal, and the normal is normal but not good enough. For example, a young man will close his eyes and fantasize about the gals until he becomes sexually aroused. Then he'll open his eyes, look around the room, and do it again, only this time you're consciously trying to get the gal pregnant. And that's not a natural thing at all. And now I understand what original sin is with a snap of the finger. The same is true with fear. We have the chimpanzee side of us, and our actions are simply determined. And then there's this other nature. And so we adopt this other nature. And that's the God and country part of it. You become a normal, well-adjusted person as you can. You will the good of another person. You make money by making somebody else better off. And then you become a good husband if you're a guy, a good wife to the husband if you're a gal. Then you become a good father and a good provider, and you become a good mother, and you adopt motherhood as a profession. You have the identity of a Yank, and then you view motherhood as a profession. And then you become a good citizen, and it spills into home economics. It was one of the other things that was thrown out in favor of individual rights. Home economics is when you view the married couple as a base economic unit, and that's how you get a detached 1950s house. To remind ourselves, Picture a 1950s house and picture the young couple in there. I'll go off to the side and start with farming and mining, and above that, manufacturing, and above that, wholesale, retail, and repair, and above that, retirement, education, and recreation. And the lawyers and the doctors form a kind of lattice that holds it all together. And it's a Catholic priest that gets everything to come into being to begin with. He creates it all. And you have home economics. You ask the gal how many oranges she wants to use. You know how many orange trees to plant. You know just what the crops to grow and what manufacturing, what things to make, and what kind of stores you want in the advertising. The overwhelming majority of advertising in the 1950s was actually geared towards the common housewife because she did all the consuming. And then that's it. The same people who do the producing do the consuming. And the same from the point of view of the gal who changes the dirty diapers, she gets the physical pleasures of sex and she gets the romantic part. And you line all those things up. And if you want to do something very that will help you, go on the computer and look at the women's liberation movement from the 70s. And now go on and type in Catholic nuns vocational stories. And you'll be amazed that they're literal opposites. You realize something terribly nightmarish with the women's liberation movement is an example. And that is that they didn't discriminate for women or against women, but rather women who were malicious and against women who practiced the virtues. And we're paying a terrible price for this. You're paying a terrible price for this. I remember listening to Dan Rather, who was a news guy in the 70s, and he paused and he looked up at the camera and he put a smirk on his face and he said, "We're in the consumption society." And there was a whole group of people who did that intentionally. They intentionally wanted us to do that. I remember to this day because I wondered what in the world is a consumption society. We're finding out the hard way now. Let's go back. Let me pause and then continue. Let's go back to the 1970s, and there's home economics, and they cashed in on it all. They completely changed our society. And so there was a husband, and the husband made enough money to support the family unit. There's an infusion there. The gal ran the house like a business, and the guy brought home the paycheck, and they're viewed as a single person. And so the guy's income paid the gas bill and the electric bill. And when gals first entered the workplace, their income didn't pay for the gas bill and the electric bill. It was outside income, other income, recreational income. And there was also a change in attitude. They institutionalized hustling is what it did. And these gals with the attitude, what did they do? They got into a duplex and started renting out property to other people. They got together and started buying fast food franchises and reinstitutionalized teenagers in the workplace. Your teenagers, not theirs. You can see that with female doctors. When female doctors, as an example, entered the workplace, they got paid like the male doctors, but they didn't have to pay the gas bill, and it was added income. They insisted on it, and as a matter of fact, they insisted on acts of reverse discrimination. You had to discriminate in favor of them. And as a matter of fact, they had crawled out from under the cruel yoke of children. And then a few years down the road, they decided that their biological clock was ticking and they wanted to take time out to have children. Right then and there should have been a big stumbling block. Everything should have stopped there, but they didn't. And they simply got away with it. And one of the things that happened is medical bills skyrocketed. The cost of medicine went through the roof. Excuse me, not for them. For that group, it actually went down. But for the rest of us, it went through the roof. The overwhelming majority of bankruptcies, I'm told, has to do with trying to pay medical bills. They did that. The feminist and Harry the hippie and Al the Afro, they did that. And they have an attitude. I have to point out that their attitude was a welded connection between money and malice. And today it's a little different. You could be in the upper class and you could be a scoundrel or a very decent person. You could be in the lower class and you could be a scoundrel or a very decent person. But at that time, when they were cashing in on it all, you had to be malicious. Well, let's pause and, excuse me. So if you're listening to this and you're a gal and you have a child, or you have a couple of teenage daughters, I wish you would call in. And you have a problem coming up with the medical bills or the dentist bills, you chime in and let us know. The same thing with the guy. Well, let's pause and then continue. They talk a lot about reparations and reparations for things like black guys, and that's just nonsense, isn't it? It's hustling. They black guys, as an example, to use an example, they would say very forcefully, so much so that they would throw bombs in the street if they didn't get everything they wanted. I'm for the violent overthrow of the United States government, says Angela Davis. If we hadn't got everything we wanted, we would have thrown it all up. We would have tore it all down, said Donna Shalala, the first female black head doctor in the country, Surgeon General. And they would say things like this: this country is so huge, it's okay if we go into debt in order to finance this, because all you have to do is pay the interest on the debt, and the country's so large, you could take that interest on theoretically forever. And therefore, we get to get everything we wanted. We operate under the auspices of a blank check and unlimited resources. And in doing so, they threw out the very definition of economics, which is the science of the allocation of limited resources. They broke the rules. And what else did they do? They got into all the real estate and gold they could get into. They got into all the drugs and girls they could get their hands on. And they literally picked out, just like all the other civilizations in the history of human beings on this earth. We, or the United States, especially the post-World War II United States, was trying so hard to do things right. And we were there, or they were there. They're the heroes. All they had to do is polish things up, and they weren't allowed to. It brings us back to courts. In the 1970s, courts came out and said there shall be no religion in government. And what does that mean? It means that they threw out those three things that make up God and country: straightening up our emotions, willing the good of another person, and doing it because of that computer cloud in the sky called Christ, that dot in the sky that forms a perfect person. And we build the psychology and the sociology and the civilization or society around it. And they threw that out. They really snuck it in. It was a Twilight Zone moment, wasn't it? The truth of the matter is they adopted the stereotypical definition of a satanic church. It's the definition of evil. And go back and look, this is exactly what they did. In the shop manual version of all this, they threw out, they institutionalized hustling. And we're paying a terrible price for this. Some of those guys that did that, they're the ones who are in the courts. They're the ones who are heads of the departments at the universities and heads of the corporations. And they're the ones that did it. And right now we're in quite a pickle. Just like some nun said in the 1970s in Japan, I think it was, the police are going to have to stand up to the police. The black guys were going to have to stand up to the black guys. The females, the gals, are going to have to stand up to the gals, the guys, and that sort of thing. It just goes on, doesn't it? And what do? I'm opening my mouth here. What do? We take a step back. We arrange things along the lines of the classic battle of good and evil. The priest is a good guy, And that's as opposed to the pimp, who's the bad guy. And the pimp is a bad guy because he separates the act of sex from the act of getting the gal pregnant. He makes money by making people worse off. He is malicious. He's the very definition of malice, and he's called the bad guy. And all the laws used to be used to say that these were the guys that were illegal. They were the ones who were arrested, and the laws favored the priest, the good guy, the guy who's being normal and well-adjusted. Let me remind myself again that judges wear black robes because Catholic priests 500 years ago in England wore black robes, and that's just what they tried to do. We were trying to do that. And so the long and short of it is, in the 70s, courts came out and changed everything. It was the Twilight Zone moment in the 70s. They could have entered the country with tanks and troops, and come to think of it, they did. They just threw bombs in the street and tore it all down. And that's what happened. And so now we're paying the price. You've got to do something. And what's wrong? They threw out God and country. What do you do about it? Well, you go back to the courts and you insist that from now on it's the Apostles' Creed. I'm going to be a Yank. If I can't be a Yank without being Catholic, well, the Pope holds the moral high ground and put the Pope in charge. And now we're back to being a Yank and nobody has any problems. And then it becomes a straightforward four-step process. Well, the first step is to publicize a sense of original sin. You and I and every human being, we turn around and we shake and shiver and we start to attack you. And whenever we talk about this stuff, and we just have to get over it. We have to have a sense of category, and the good guy Democrats are over here and the good guy Republicans are over here. And now we go to work. And then it becomes a straightforward three-step process. We go back to home economics. We go down and instead of taking over the courts and getting ourselves a Cuban hat and cigar, we throw the bums out of there, and I'm sure they won't be violent, and I'm sure they will say, I'm sorry, and they'll go get a garbage sack and start forming a class of peasantry beneath the class of poverty that they caused. And then we don't stop there. Instead, we go find these poor characters of criminal trial attorneys and prosecutors, the ones that defend the poor and the oppressed, the Perry Masons of the world, and then we beat them up. Then we throw a bucket of icy cold water on them, and then we insist that they take over the courts. We insist that they live in a doctor's and lawyer's house. They'll never be in the foothills collecting rent, but they'll be living in a doctor and lawyer's house. I insist on it. And I insist that they take Wednesdays off and they drive a Corvette or a Cadillac and they play in that silly tennis tournament they have every year, whether they like it or not. And I declare victory. I've won, haven't I? And that's phase one, by the way. Phase two, you go back and you reallocate wealth in the good sense of the word. They got into gold and real estate and became professional consumers. Well, they can give up all the houses they bought and rented out. They can go form a class of peasantry. And then you turn around and you sell the houses to us. If you're not a plumber, but the plumber who's going to be a Yank, a sort of a 1950s American Yank, then you get to hold in the house. You don't rent property to people and you don't rent property from people. And if you're going to be the gal that we're desperately trying to get to comment on, if you're going to be an American citizen, a Yank, then you get to live in a house. If you're going to be a housewife, you have to have a house to live in. Home economics is what gets us out of poverty and into plenty. And it all rests on that gal's abilities, her personality, her personally. And so we hope you'll start chiming in. We hope you'll pass the word. We're going to be here on tomorrow at 11 o'clock here in Tucson, at 2 o'clock New York time, and at 4 o'clock London time. where it's important for us to get those guys in London, the gals, to start making comments, because so much of this stuff was developed in England or Great Britain, and you can see all the problems they're having there, and you can just see what needs to be done, and we'll just gather our gang. We'll get them to go back to being proper Brits. And it's the same as Susie in St. Louis and all the rest of the countries. Okay, well, so we hope to see you tomorrow, and then hopefully we'll have these podcasts at let's see, 7 p.m. London time on Thursdays and Fridays. Excuse me, on Fridays, Saturdays, and at 4 o'clock on Sundays, and here in Tucson at 12 o'clock Fridays and Saturdays, and 9 o'clock on Sundays. And if we can gather our gang together, we can get some clout. We can do something about this stuff. Good luck to you. We'll see you tomorrow.